friend, and I do realize this is a tremendous challenge to speak right before the lunch hour. But anyway, I must admit, when the invitation first extended to me, I was overjoyed for 5 seconds. Then soon became a tremendous level of anxiety. I couldn't quite rationalize for myself how would I be even qualified or adequately qualified to speak or share the same podium with Professor Sachs, whom we have. I first met in 2009 when I went to New York to follow and learn from the staff of Global Classroom. But again, as you can see, I also soon to realize I do have to share some level of responsibility in supporting and participating in this very, very meaningful, important forum. And I think I have the pleasure and privilege, along with Dr. Sonia Sachs, we all graduated from Harvard School of Health, and which is following the staff of Dr. Brooke-Brenklin, who is also our graduate. And I had the privilege to host her in 2014 when she received the first Tom Prize Sustainable Development Laureate here and visited in Taiwan. Then in 2015, when the leadership, or under the leadership of Professor Sachs announcing the SDG goal, I had the opportunity to become the university president. At the time, we then soon adopt the framework. We became, I think in all fairness, one of the very, very first major university. We have close to 30,000 people, including major hospital in Taiwan, and over 100 years history. So I think we were among the very first few to adopt the entire SDG framework into the university development plan. And through that time, I think it's following here, I then under the supervision and support of Professor Y.T. Lee, between 2016 and 2018, we worked with the Tom Price Foundation and organizing the Brooke-Brenklin Week for female scientists from developing and or underdeveloping countries, and that become a very, very major force scientific cluster to nurture and support their work out of Asia. And through the time, then we also get grow back and then have her honoring degree and then engage in our teaching education. But this is very much also a presentation, a dedication to all the support and resources from the NGO and corporate sector in Taiwan over the time. Because over the years, as maybe remote we are from the global landscape, we did put in our resources. We commit our belief in supporting all this development. We support all the foreign students from the sort of less attended area to complete their education and then went home to grow and develop and evolve, become an important professional of their own. But I saw in organizing my homework for today, I will just simply focus on 2 features, which Professor Sachs emphasized repeatedly in his talk, and also Sonia mentioned in the video, that has to be scientific evidence-based, and that they have to bring up the spirit of cooperation, and maybe also pay attention to those in the executive area. This is a very much updated sort of a map. Underlying that, this is the sort of the variation with the temperature by gradient, but also really reflects where are we today at 2023. You see flood in Australia, but you have drought over there in Canada. You see Japan and Europe probably have the same temperature. Over 40 degrees in this time of the year. But the challenges is that we're from a climate perspective. But how would that affect SDG development? As I think it's not sort of unfamiliar to our understanding that particular effort does not stand alone in SDG 30. It goes across the board, affect pretty much the overall SDG development around the world. And that's the fact we should underline. But I think we also need to be more attentive to the fact those developing countries or developing nations are, in a way, more affected interconnectedly than the others. And this is something that we should always keep in mind. I also like to follow maybe the second pillar that I will go across in today's presentation. That's the understanding and the realization of geopolitical instability Some of the notions were already mentioned, but I think it's the reality we should keep in mind in our daily practices. Those are not only from the environmental perspective, but more from political, military, and the other economic stance. The other pillars is something that affect us. And as you can see, that taking this as an example, the Russian-Ukrainian armed conflicts could affect us by category. Categorically, you see biodiversity is impacted on maybe a more regional level. Social category of SDG are impacted on a more close home, like in this sort of local level. Nevertheless, the category of SDG matrices are affected by a single word, economically, for the entire globe. And this is something that for us to bring in mind. The last pillar that I will go across in the presentation today is how the pandemic, most familiar to us, is of course the COVID. But it definitely would be in the time of the future that will be more frequent than probably we expected. Of course, the studies show that people, scholars, institutions around the world have identified their own responses or resilience in terms of how they respond to every single SDG. But across the board, I think on average, you are seeing a stagnant of sort of SDG index scores since 2019. And this is something as an evidential basis for us to be remembered and realized. So summarize for you, in the midst of sort of between 2015 and 2030, this is the newest update information summarized out of the SDSN network. You see, out of the 140 targets that can be evaluated scientifically, half of them show moderate or severe deviations from the desired prediction. That's baseline of 2050. But I think even more strikingly is that nearly 30% of those targets have experienced either no progress or worse, regression below the 2050 baseline. And that shows how much work we have to do. So in the interest of time, I will focus in the following section of the presentation from two particular sectors. One is definitely health, which is close to my education. In Boston, I think, sorry, I can remember this from the wall, in 65 Huntington Avenue. And it says that the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being. I later also took that model and then embraced it into the way that we educate and manage the university. And that's why Professor Zhou mentioned that how SDG become the whole scheme of administration, education, research, as well as the social engagement in the later part of my work. So first domain is how climate will impact on the health. I'd like to bring your attention to that. It's the systems of the system, as Professor Sachs always said, is intersected. If you notice in the sort of a right column of the work, regardless of the level of scientific evidence or scientific sufficiency, almost across every single matrix or across every single sort of a sector, we are seeing an increasing adverse impacts on the health through the climate perspective. The other but there's another very, very important sort of dimension that I could bring your attention, is that today we remain the lack or the shortage of sufficient information to adequately or properly or fairly address the concern from individual sector. This table highlights for you that if you look across either as an infectious disease or chronic disease or mental disease, we do not have equally sufficient information for different subgroup voices, whether it would be by biological basis or gender basis of information. And that requires further scientific research, education, and effort for us to bring this all together and make it a fair judgment at the end of the day. The second section is always education. You see how directly, indirectly, climate definitely hamper the level of education we will be able to deliver. So there's an increased vulnerability of educational system. Taking heavy precipitation alone, through the time, you see there's a decline of educational attainment index nearly across every corner of the world, even based on Taiwanese data, because I have done that also a number of years. So there's a drop in school attendance, poor performance, and school dropouts. The other, or sort of another pillar that we will bring attention to how geopolitical risk would also impact sort of health and their current status and challenges. You can easily imagine there will be mobility, mortality involved in any level of geopolitical confrontation. So taking the number, there will be 95 million people that are in extreme poverty through this single war. But one thing to be noticed is that the poorest will be always the hardest hit. So how could you bring that particular concern into your average number? When we do that, and it would be some exercise that we should be immersed into our education or our conceptual understanding. But altogether, looking at the ripple effect, we'll be seeing estimates of at least that many people facing acute hunger across 81 countries. Coming toward the area of another aspect, look at how geopolitical risk is dampering or hindering our education, of course, by the number. You see so many institutions would have suffered from the bombing and the shelling and the complete sort of invasion around. And that would definitely stop their public education. But economically, let me see if I think I have this one, but I probably will come back later. Looking at the pandemic, there's the early report on the global, this is the most recent report on Taiwan data to see how much we have lost, either for mortality or the loss of mobility in that particular regard. And this is just one of the very, very basic or typical example. But I have to bring your attention, this is already seen in Taiwan by being in the medical setting every day. With this level of social isolation over the past 3 years, we're seeing a strikingly rising number of those in Alzheimer and the other particular disease that's being triggered, that's being reported and presented to the hospital sector. And we are simply lack of the proper support accompaniment system to sustain the growth and the rise of this particular sort of increasing speed. Finally, we'll be looking at from the point of education. Definitely, we are familiar with the loss of school days. We are familiar with how they will be losing the touch of practical, hands-on education training, which is absolutely critical for our next phase of economic transformation. I think it's in many, many corners of the country. But in altogether, I think this number suggested that this particular generation of students worldwide is now will be losing 21 trillion in lifetime earnings in present value due to school closures. And that definitely would keep think as an important issue to realize. So with that as a premise, I think we all realize that not only education is the key to human capital, but we are now in total desperation for the proper education of the talent for sustainable development. Individually or categorically, you can probably gauge how many will be needed for one single industry, for instance, green industry, energy industry, or so forth, even those going to the low energy dependency semiconductor industry. That can be gauged or that can be estimated. But something missing is the idea of the attributes of this generation, of this group of talent, would have to be totally different from before. They would need to have a better understanding of systematic thinking, comprehensive understanding to the whole system. But also they probably need to sort of possess a spirit of anti-discipline. Because any discipline goes silo, goes independently, would not solve the issues in any form at all. And I think that presents a total challenge to the education system and those people like us who are teaching or going to the class every day. I'd like, as Sonia said, a few more scientific evidence to justify why education and new form of education is absolutely critical for that. For instance, taking this particular scheme and analyze in the IPCC or 4 report that with education and very much with a form of diverse learning and quality education, you'll be able to increase the type of information availability and therefore bring the whole public into some sense of awareness. Education can, in a way, also prepare a better adaptation of health impact for climate hazard. I think this is just one of the aspects or one of the perspectives to look at that. But education needs to also bear in mind there's a contribution to ease off the gap of regional injustice. For instance, taking this number from the African Women Climate Adaptive Priorities, you see, in average, almost 40% of the agricultural workforce in 46 out of 53 countries in Africa, their major workforce is women. And I have worked quite extensively with a group of them. But they are always the hardest hit when the climate hazard comes, when the energy crisis spreads out. So currently, there will be in desperate need for better education, for those resources to support them with more affordable technology. Not just the technology that can be adopted in developed countries, but it's the technology that can be adopt and apply and accepted in their own local stream. Another perspective for you to remember is in the education for the future, the diversity and in a way of gender equality is very, very important and meaningful. To remember for you, we have seen overcoming gender inequality will contribute to the climate resilience. And those countries who have higher proportion of females in the parliament tend to have considerably more stringent climate policies in a way. So I hope they can be agreed upon in an average sense, and we have a lot of room to catch up, as Professor Sachs have already addressed a few times in the past few days. So therefore, I think the education in the next generation or in the time to come, we have definitely first to really engage all stakeholders from the resources, expertise, and wisdom of government, private sector, industry, NGOs, as well as academia and the other research sector. But I think education will have to also transform and empower learning of all ages. And that's why university today, as Ambassador Jen mentioned, that we sort of actively and proactively reach out to other level of education and network with primary school, with the senior high school to engage on the all four forces and transformation. But higher education does have a special role and important responsibility to that. In number, for most of the area in the world today, we are directly or indirectly 50% of the total burden by population or by number per se. And university, if taken in a positive or a more sort of engaging way, does have the potential to contribute significantly with a tremendous value. For instance, they can lead the policy initiative. Fossil-free exercise is something that grew out from the student group, and when I was managing the university, it's only over 3 years. We will be able to divest our entire economic or financial portfolio into a more fossil-free engagement. The second example would be university is a place to offer technology and to link around the world. The Open Lab out of Yale have successfully engaged in and networking with the mine industry in Canada, and therefore they have a more friendly, transparent, and open sort of accounting or reporting carbon sort of trace information and recognized and also finally formally recognized by the Canadian government. University could also, by the base itself, out of London, my other students and colleague and team have been just there, and then they could, by as a beginning, renovating the place and launching, identify and embracing the value to support becoming either a sustainable workforce place or to nurture our more sustainable business that will go into the future operation. So humbly moving to the last part of my presentation, this is what I have been able to exercise since 2017 after we have the whole scheme. And the way it's there is that from the top tier, strategy will have to be settled, planned out, launched by the leadership. So every major ranking officer in the top part of the university operation will have to be nurtured and then crafted their own scheme. The second tier is that every single major thematic exercise in the university will have to go along and identify and even calibrate their mission, their value, their operation scheme into the sort of a total framework of SDG. Whether it's a social communication project or it's a sort of a policy forum level exercise of SDG forum, or a very highly technical project like microalgae energy issue or social service program. We program the work. We send students, faculty out into every remote villages to cultivate our youngsters to be able to equip with a coding skill so that they have another way of looking out to the world. They have another way of preparing their self-future. And on the tier 3, exactly, execution will happen in every department. Execution will happen in every college. Execution will also be happening in every major research center. But all of them have to align their value, their mission, their operation scheme into the entire framework of SDG value. And that's part of the education as well, to promote and sustain their understanding. Finally, we keep track closely our quantitative index and our quality performance in all projects. And this is a way of accountability. There's a way of reviewing how this institution in different aspects, in different pillars, education, research, governance, and their external sort of partnership or leadership are moving close and aligned to the SDG goals, and in a way of education and self-reflection as well. So with that, we now rank 24 world in the world through the impact ranking. I think this is the best out of the entire Asia, and probably many of my Taiwanese institution colleagues are doing that as well. And university as a community could have our own self-learning system as well. So I took the best practice as an internal exercise. You see, friends from Malaysia identify categorically, specifically in matrix form, how their hurdles and blocks are. But we can take the experiences also. They have the action. The blockers is from our friends in Madrid. So by across different continent, border, higher education in the global platform and the global sector could really learn from each other, encourage each other, and to support each other in the most difficult challenges every day in university operation. But again, there will be also support needed. I realize many of the corporate leaders or stakeholders are either in our venue today or online. I think your generous support are definitely critical. I think Professor Sachs ended in his final message as well. And informal resources needed and would definitely support and facilitate and nurture a better form of education so that we have a better group of talent to engage in the future. So by ending the sort of presentation, I thought we all have our shared responsibility in making sure our next generation's talents are not only equipped with technical knowledge, but they have a much deeper understanding toward the value of sustainable and a peaceful future. Therefore, we highlight most of the sort of education program in a more dynamic, transformative way. In any time, we are linking them with the global partners, either as a mentor or as a colleague. Quite 3 dozens of my students are now in the forestry, out in nowhere in Japan. In the same team, they are NGO, they are corporate leaders, they are skilled workers, so that they can craft out the
circular, sustainable, and totally environmental friendly type of forest industry in the next generation. So any form is helpful. And they need to have global concerns in mind. They need to equip also with the future-ready skill. But most importantly, they have to be creative and determine ourselves, committed to be a leader in the future challenge. So for all these years, 25 years, or how many was that, since the graduation from the school, I have always felt blessed to be able to University of BC, because to me it's always a place that could support, encourage, and recognize the value of experiments, and then recognize the meaning, the value of innovation. And we need to have this very important hub, so that through experiments we generate the hard knowledge, but through cooperation, that we will have a way to lead into the next form of better civilization and for the betterment of our common future. Thank you all very much.